Hi, I'm Somu and I'm going to show you how you can sand a wooden surface for your everyday small DIY projects. Now, if you have ever done sanding before, you would agree when I say that sanding is the most boring task in the entire life cycle of making a wooden piece of furniture a craft. The bad news is sanding is highly essential and cannot be ignored because what it leads to is a really beautiful and smooth finish, not just to the look of your eyes but also to the feel of your touch. What I will do today is use this spare piece of one-side teak that I have to demonstrate the theory of what sanding can really do. Now from a distance it may look like the surface is smooth, clean and the grain patterns are enhanced, visible and all that, but a closer examination would reveal that it is really not as smooth as we want it to be. So let's see how using sandpapers we can reach to that level of smoothness. You can buy sandpapers in any hardware store in India. Now what you need to be really interested in is the grade that is mentioned in the rear of the sandpaper. Now what it indicates is the number of sand grit particles per square inch. So what you will have is a 50 grit sandpaper, 80 grit sandpaper, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220, 350, even 400 and 500 grit sandpapers. Now the general logic for sanding is you always start with a lower grit sandpaper and move upwards towards the higher grit sandpapers. Now whether you start with 80, 100 or 120 really depends on the existing level of smoothness on the surface. For example, now for this demonstration, I'm afraid because of the fact that the surface is already smooth to a certain extent, I'm afraid that 80 or 100 grit sandpapers will only do more damage than good. So I'm going to start my first level of sanding with 120 grit sandpaper, then my second level of sanding would be with 150 grit sandpaper, and I would finally smoothen it off using 220 grit sandpapers. Now what these different levels of sanding would do is provide the next degree of smoothness, and it will also remove the scratches left over by the previous level of sanding. What I have is a piece of 120 grit sandpaper which I'm going to use to do my first level of sanding. So I'm going to use this 120 grit sandpaper to start the sanding process. I have laid my wooden piece on a flat surface and I start sanding. Now there are two rules to remember while you're sanding. The first rule is always sand along the direction of the grain. Never sand across the direction. And the second rule is apply very gentle and even pressure. Once you're done with the sanding process, make sure you wipe off the leftover dust particles using a rag cloth. So what I've done is I've used 120 grit sandpaper and I've done my first level of sanding on this half of the wooden surface. I'm not sure if you would notice the change at this point in time, but if you can look closely, the sanded surface is slightly lighter in color than the unsanded surface, and if you can look at it from an angle, you will also notice that it is slightly smoother than the unsanded surface. Now I started with 120 and decided to have 3 levels of sanding. However, I can also decide to start with 80 and have 5 levels of sanding, but all that is dependent on the existing smoothness level of the surface. Now that we're done with 120, the next stage is for me to do sanding with 150 grit sandpaper. So now I have completed sanding with the 150 grit sandpaper, and this is how it looks now. Now I believe the change is really evident. What the 150 grit sandpaper has done is it has removed the little scratches that were left behind by the 120 grit sandpaper. The next step is for me to sand it with 220 grit sandpaper. So this is how it is done. You start with a lower grit sandpaper, move upwards to multiple levels until you reach the level of smoothness that you desire. Hope you liked watching this video. Please do join us in Facebook. Until next time, this is Somu. See you.